No problem.
There you go.
All right, we're all set. Thank you so much, Diana, and thanks everyone for taking the time to join me today. I'm really excited to be the guest speaker today for the session Forms for All, building accessibility into UiPath apps design. So, just a second here. So, a little bit about me before we get started. My name's David. I'm a UiPath Community MVP. I specialize in apps and RPA. I have roughly 15 years or so of experience building, delivering applications to real world businesses. I work for Ashling Partners. We're an intelligent automation services provider in this space. I do a mix of solutions engineering, product marketing. It's all incredibly fun and keeps me very busy and on my toes. So I'm very passionate about apps and user experience, and I'm going to dive into a really important segment of user experience today around accessibility. So for the agenda, we'll start today by talking a little bit about accessibility and what it is at a high level. We'll look at a story that I actually experienced in my career firsthand. This is all based on a real life scenario around accessible design. Next, we'll talk about why accessibility is a requirement and not just a nice to have for public facing organizations and government institutions, especially. We'll look at some disability statistics to help you understand the breakdown of users that have disabilities. We'll discuss how to build accessible forms in UiPath apps with a demo example and different considerations. And we'll wrap up with different techniques on how you can make your apps more accessible for the hearing impaired, the visually impaired, or the physically disabled. This is a huge passion of mine. I hope you have some questions for me at the end, or at the very least, try to spread the word. More people need to know about accessibility to make our world a better place and improve our digital ecosystem. So let's start by introducing accessibility to those that might not be aware of what it is. So, what is accessibility when it comes to application development? It's really about making the applications and the websites that we build usable by everyone, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. It's a bit of an unfortunate oversight, but many people don't consider these folks when they are building their applications, and they end up frustrating their users and potentially opening themselves up for litigation. So, ask yourself, are you confident that the application that you just delivered can be used by someone who has color blindness? What about if they're hard of hearing? Can they use your app with just a keyboard if they have physical limitations and can't use a mouse? And sure, many of the developers that build these applications are, of course, ensuring we accommodate those with disabilities. But it is absolutely extremely important for larger federal organizations and those that take federal funding to avoid discrimination lawsuits. So you did hear me correctly there. If you build an application that is public facing and it doesn't accommodate for those with disabilities, depending on the organization you work for, you could be opening yourself up to that. Um, and at the end of the day, developers who add accessibility into their applications, we really aim to provide, a better user experience for everyone. And by building more accessible applications, they achieve that aim by giving their users clear interfaces, more options, and better usability features. So, why does accessibility matter? And why is it so important to consider when building applications? To do this, I'm just going to illustrate by going back to a development project that I worked on previously in my career. The application development project was for a solar power manufacturing company where we were building a document management system that would be heavily used by our quality control team on the manufacturing line. One of the key stakeholders was a very nice woman. We'll call her Martha. And she was the rock star of the quality control team. Martha's job was to make sure that the solar panels we were shipping to our customers were going to work on the first time with minimal warranty claims. A lot of this documentation was processed daily while on her computer. She had fantastic attention to detail and she found many gaps in quality. She was absolutely crucial to the operations of the company. During the project, Martha gave us many great requirements to make the document management system better. And after several months, the project became a huge success. We built a fantastic DMS that included all the fancy approvals, the notifications, the integration and workflow, all the bells and whistles. But the most striking moment for me was actually when I witnessed Martha working on the new system after it had been deployed. She was squinting at the screen. She used a hotkey to actually open up Windows Magnifier, which is an accessibility tool, to increase the text and image sizes, read through the documents, and just in general get about the application interface. So you see, this is something Martha actually did every single day while she was crushing her job, which is absolutely amazing. So, believe it or not, Martha struggled to see clearly. Even with her glasses, it was a challenge for her to work with the small fonts and the blended colors that we had put into our DMS. None of this came through in requirements because she didn't think it was important. When I talked to her about it, she said it was an issue that just affected her, she said. And she told us to focus on the bigger picture of other users across the company. See, Martha was used to struggling with applications and trying to read them no matter what application it was. But for me, as a UX interface designer, I was completely heartbroken. Watching someone struggle so hard on something they had to do every day when I could, with a few simple changes on my end, make things so much easier for her or make her feel more included, it really made me feel guilty. So we started up several sprint cycles to really take into account her as a target end user, and we added multiple accessibility features into the backlog for her after just watching her work and seeing where we could make improvements. So I started to have regular chats with Martha and discussed how we might make certain images larger, interface components easier to navigate, reposition those components to make her life, a little bit more easier than it was presently. And we rolled those changes out in subsequent updates. Interestingly enough, we did see improved usability scores for the application across all of our users, not just those that had a self-identified visual impairment. They liked how much easier it was to take in the interface. It wasn't convoluted anymore like it was in the past. Many of you on the call can probably remember some of those early systems we used to see back in the late 2000s, early 2010 era. In the end, I believe Martha and I were able to help each other. She enjoyed an incredible jump in work quality, and I learned an incredible lesson as a junior developer to carry forward into the next 30 years of my career. That lesson was never assume everyone has the same abilities to use a computer, and always include a wide range of people in your acceptance testing. When we think about accessibility, we might think adding in these features in is just being kind, but many businesses have learned the hard way that not thinking about people like Martha can lead to very expensive lawsuits under ADA legislation. So I'll pivot into that now. Under the ADA, more than 11,000 people have filed discrimination lawsuits against organizations that don't follow accessibility compliance guidelines and legislation. So this is more formally known as Section 508. It's a federal law that requires agencies to provide individuals with disabilities equal access to electronic information and data comparable to those who do not have disabilities. So many organizations out there receive federal funding and, as such, are subject to Section 508, including healthcare institutions that receive Medicare or Medicaid, a higher education that participates in federal programs or receives any form of federal funding, right? There's a lot of organizations out there that fall into that category. And when we think about accessibility, there are just so many scenarios where it's absolutely crucial to accommodate for all people. So think about things like online learning platforms, healthcare portals, public transportation sites, banking and financial services, job application portals, and voting information and campaign sites, just to name a few. There's many, many more examples, but you can see why this is so important. So let's take a step back from the complexities of legislation and just look a little bit more at disability figures. So if you were to go out there and just pick 100 people out of a crowd, the statistics show that 14 of those will have difficulty with mobility. 11 will have cognitive disabilities. 7 will struggle to live independently. 6 are deaf or hard of hearing, 5 are blind or struggle to see, and 4 struggle to perform basic self care like dressing or bathing. So if you add these up, and some of these people have more than one disability, right? But if you were just add them up, that's nearly half of the people that you pick out that have abilities or disabilities that may make it difficult to use your app. So this is a really big deal, right? So what can we do to help these people out? Well, we have to start somewhere, and the types of accommodations we create will vary greatly depending on the ability or disability. So, for example, for Jane Doe on the left there, she only has one arm due to an injury, so she can only use a keyboard. So, we have to make sure our application doesn't require a mouse. For Greg, who is deaf, we need to show transcripts and subtitles with all audio and video content. For Chris, who's colorblind, he needs the ability to pick a color scheme that doesn't make it hard for him to use the application, or at least allow him to switch to one that he prefers. For Melinda, who is legally blind, we need to ensure that assistive software like Windows Narrator or screen readers like JAWS can read the forms that we create for those that can't see or who struggle to see. So you can imagine, I'm sure many of you have been on development projects. This is a huge challenge to accommodate this many different types of requirements. But thankfully, there are some guidelines that exist that we can follow to help ourselves out. And those guidelines are known as WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They are published by the World Wide Web Consortium, who set the international standards for the internet. By following these guidelines, our apps and websites can achieve different classifications of accessibility, all the way from the single A designation to double A, and finally triple A, which is the best. A is the lowest level. It's not particularly great, but it does address some of the most basic accessibility issues. Double A is what I would say is the target standard for most websites. It addresses a much wider range of accessibility concerns. Triple A is best in class. It's aimed at making a website or app as accessible as possible for the largest set of users with ability and disability breakdowns. So, how do we build more accessible applications? Well, we follow the following WCAG principles during our design phase. So this is known as the POUR principles. POUR stands for it's POUR, and it stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So let's break that down real quick. So first, we ask ourselves, are our apps perceivable? Information and user interface components must be presented in ways that users can perceive. That means that users must be able to recognize and use the information regardless of their sensory abilities. Techniques to make apps perceivable might include things like providing text alternatives for non text content, like images and videos, offering captions and other alternatives for multimedia, creating content that can be presented in different ways without losing information or structure. So think about like simpler layouts instead of more complex or impacted layouts. Making it easier or simpler for users to see and hear content, or even anticipating color blindness with a specific targeted set of color schemes that we know they'll be able to see. Second, we ask ourselves, are our apps operable? User interface components and navigation have to be able to be navigated. This means that users must be able to operate the interface, and the interface should not require, interaction that a user cannot perform. So different techniques to make apps operable include, ensuring all functionality is available from a keyboard for users who cannot use a mouse, giving users enough time to read and use the content before hiding it, not designing content in a way that is known to cause seizures. You might have seen those warnings before certain movies or video games where they say the amount of flashing on the screen could potentially cause seizures. So we want to avoid that type of content or interactions within our application, as well as providing ways to help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are within the application interface. Third, we ask ourselves, are our apps understandable? So information and the operation of the user interface has to be understandable. Users must be able to understand the information and the operation of the user interface. So Techniques that you might use to make an app understandable might include making the text more readable and understandable. So clarifying the text, making the text larger, increasing the contrast on the text, making web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. So, if you look at the standards that are set through modern website design, following those types of standards versus going against those standards, right? So that they know what to expect as they're using the application, helping users avoid and correct mistakes that they might have on their form. And then lastly, we ask ourselves, are apps robust? So, content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents. So, that, like I mentioned earlier, the different assistive technologies like, Windows accessibility or JAWS. As technologies and user agents evolve, the content needs to remain accessible. And this includes accessible not just um, on a form or an app that's being used from your PC, but also from a mobile device. So, um, thankfully, UiPath has done a lot of the work there for us, but we still do need to ensure that when we build our apps, that we do things the right way. So, what might this actually look like on a UiPath apps project? So let's open the case and show you a little bit of what that would look like. So if you've been building any apps, you'll be familiar with this design that I'm sharing on my screen. This is one of the pre-built templates that UiPath provides when you go to build one of your first apps. And one of the things I wanted to show you is what that experience might look like for someone that's trying to operate this app with disabilities. So I'm going to click on the form, and if I don't have the ability to use the mouse, I'm going to need to use the keyboard to interact with this application. That automatically elevates the challenge of using this application. And despite it having a beautiful layout, it's going to become more challenging for me to work with. And let me show you what I mean by that. One of the ways that users with abilities or disabilities will move across an application is by hitting the tab key. So I'm going to hit the tab key a couple times, and you'll notice that that very first tab that I just put, I don't know if you caught it, but it's this little gray box right over here. So I'm going to tab again, tab again, tab again, tab again. These hidden components that users like, users that don't have, certain abilities or disabilities, they might not even notice that that's there, but someone that has or struggles with those problems or abilities and disabilities, they may really, struggle to work with this application, right? And so, as we tab through, you can see where those issues might lie. So how do I get over to the start process or the save button, right? How do I navigate through this interface? So what I did here is I created an accessibility mode up here at the top. And so when you click this accessibility mode button, what will actually happen here is it will convert the application into an application that is more accessible. So I'm going to hit that button. That's going to convert my application. You're going to see a lot of things happen on the screen. The first thing is the contrast has been dramatically improved. So you're going to see, situations here where the text is a lot more readable than it was previously, right? If we compare it to the previous app, all the text sizes have been increased. Instead of putting the fields to the right for the address, we've stacked them so that you can read those from the top down. It's a little bit more clear, easier to take in, and also much easier for a screen reading program to be able to ascertain that and read that out to the user as they're interacting with the form. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this interface, and I'm going to hit tab once. And you're going to see that automatically actually takes me down to this button here on the bottom left, see all list items. If I hit tab again, it moves to start loan approval process. Tab again, send email, tab, tab, tab. I can type my notes, and then I can click the save button to save those notes in. So what I'm trying to do here is make the application as clear as possible in where that information can be entered. And what's really cool about doing it this way is you're not asking every user that uses your application to use accessibility mode, but you're providing it as an option so that they can interact with it if it's easier for them to do so. So that's just kind of a little fun little example that shows, the possibilities that you can do within UiPath apps. The way that I set this up was actually really straightforward. So I went in here and I added first I cloned the dashboard and I gave it the underscore of accessible. And then I made different changes to the components. And one of the nice things about UiPath is that you can select multiple controls at the same time. So this is a recent update that allowed us to do this. So we can go in here and we can make different property changes to those controls to increase the font size, reduce the font size fairly quickly. I also went in on this dashboard and I set a rule. I added a button for this accessibility mode, right? And in here, I configure a rule that changes the page to show the accessible dashboard when it's clicked. And on the accessible dashboard, I do the same thing, but for turning off accessibility mode. So hopefully that makes sense there. If you have any questions on that, just let me know towards the end of the session. Happy to walk through it. Um, but let's go ahead and keep moving forward. All right. So this is just one, small example of how you can work to build more accessible applications using UiPath apps. But what else can you do to, help improve accessibility? First thing, bring it up during your projects. Educate other users on the importance of WCAG principles. If anyone on the team mentions they have a disability, make sure you include them and take them seriously during testing. If you work for a public facing company or organization that receives that federal funding, tell your boss when a public facing app may not be compliant. Educate your organization on the importance of respecting the ADA and Section 508 if relevant to your industry. And lastly, include accessibility needs as a part of your requirements gathering, not as an afterthought. When we look at techniques for the visually impaired, there are some great apps out there that can help us. Adobe Color has the ability to build a color palette and see what it would look like to users that have color blindness. This even allows you to test against AA and AAA WCAG standards to really ensure that compliance that we talked about earlier. So let me see if I can show you an example of this in action here. So if I switch over to Adobe Color, and you can, again, this is a free tool, anyone can use it. But you can come out here and you can pick a predefined color palette and you can see where the color conflicts might lie for different forms of color blindness. So these are the three most common forms of color blindness here. And you can see what each color would look like to someone who has that form of color blindness. This is really, really cool. So we can start to move these around and start to get a feel for the different colors and say, okay, so B and D are in conflict. Well, we might want to move B to a color that doesn't have that conflict. And now all of those colors are clear and different from the other, although I would argue this D and A for Tretinopeia is probably still pretty difficult. So we might want to adjust that further. There you go. But you get the idea, right? You can go in and configure that color palette so you can anticipate what types of struggles folks might have using your app. One other thing that I've seen folks use this tool for is you can go and you can check contrast, which is really, really cool. So you can come in, you can set your text color for your application and your background color for your application. You can see previews and how components might look against that. So in this situation, it is a pass, but in my opinion, this is still probably a little bit, I would want to have a little bit more contrast in this if possible. So you might, do something along these lines, and you can see that contrast ratio goes from a 5 to 1 to a 10 to 1, much easier to read. And so what might pass on a trip, maybe that would pass on a AAA, whereas on a AA, the previous background color I think we had earlier, I think it was similar to this one. You can see that wouldn't have passed because it doesn't meet that higher level of expectation for the contrast. So really, really fun little website to use if you are focusing on accessibility. And then moving back here, so what are some different techniques we can use for the deaf or the hard of hearing? We can ensure we add subtitles to all of our video content. We can add summaries or transcripts of our content that can be read as an alternative to listening to videos or podcasts, right? We can provide additional volume controls in our media. to raise the sound louder or provide subtitles or closed captioning as an option. Furthermore, we can allow subtitle contrast, text size, and color to all be adjusted by the user. If those of you use, Amazon Prime or Netflix or any of those streaming apps, you'll be very familiar with this. If you use subtitles, you can usually go in and change those subtitles to a preferred contrast, size, color, however it is that suits your eyes. Um, we can ensure that important notifications have a visual element in addition to a sound on systems where an audible sound is displayed as an alert. And last but not least, we can provide support numbers, all right, for our app or website for email, IM, or live chat in addition to just a phone number. A lot of people oversee this when they go to build a public facing app and they want to leave a contact number for a contact center. Well, folks may not be able to talk with your support team on the phone. So you need to provide those additional options to make sure everyone is included. And one thing I try to do for folks that are hard of hearing is I always try to use plain language. This is because there are many deaf people that have English as their second language. So, you try to avoid jargon or uncommon words. This is actually something when I was working at a previous company, I used to create a lot of documentation and I would share it with my colleagues overseas. And they used to tell me, well, I understand that this word resonates well in your industry, but can you please simplify that for us? Because, English is not our primary language and we want to be able to understand this as well. Right. So it's very helpful when you think about trying to localize your app or share it across the world to a more global audience. And, lastly, there are some techniques for supporting the physically disabled, right? So ensure that your application can be completed without mouse interaction. In the application I showed earlier, I know that I clicked the button and that was actually a bit of a mistake. I meant to tab over to the button and select it, which you can easily do using the tab interface. And that way you don't actually need to use a mouse at all to activate your accessibility mode. In UiPath, the order of the fields matters and can be influenced accordingly. So don't add, extra containers like we got hung up on in that first app or controls unless they're actively being used because those would have to be tabbed through. So just keep that in mind. Um, one of the feature requests I've made to the team is just to have a tab index order. So you would be able to, as the application developer, specify the order at which the controls would be tabbed into. And I think that feature would be coming soon. But we also want to avoid flashing anything on the screen that could cause those, potential seizures. And also, you think about the way modern notifications are delivered. A lot of times they have like these little temporary toast notifications, right? Where there's a little quick pop up that lets you know something happened. Try to limit the use of those as much as possible. Those can be really, really hard for users that have physical disabilities to deal with. So not only are they small, but they're temporary. And so if you're trying to align an accessibility tool like a Windows magnifier to look at that component in time, you can see where the issues would lie with something like that. So with that said, I would like to thank each of you for attending, and I want to open the floor here for any questions that anyone has around building more accessible applications.
David, I have a question for you. When you talked about the
Sure.
standards, were those US standards or are those global standards?
Yeah, that's a good question. The WCAG, I believe, is a worldwide framework.
Okay,
The ADA and Section 508 more specifically apply to the United States.
great.
So the legislation that I was referring to earlier, the WCAG, I think, is a much more of a worldwide standard for building websites across the world.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that applies a lot more now that UiPath Apps has released the public-facing app capability. That's why I really wanted to have this session, was to potentially get in front of anyone that's working on those public-facing applications that might go out to a very broad audience, whether it's government constituents, citizens of a country, so on and so forth.
Right. And then you have another question. Are you working with other orgs in enhancing their online accessibility?
Am I specifically working with other organizations? I used to do it earlier in my career, which is why I'm so passionate about it. we are absolutely able to have those conversations around, how to potentially take UiPath apps specifically and make it more accessible. Happy to have those conversations with you if you have the time and want to explore that. But I am not personally on a project for it at this time. Let me see if there's anything else in chat here.
I'm not
Any other
seeing.
questions?
Yeah, one more. For cognitive
Yeah.
disability people, how will it be helpful?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question, and it's something I wanted to add into the presentation. I just didn't have the time to accommodate it in. There's a lot of different types of you know, different ways in which people think, right? And this really gets to my earlier point of you want to make the interfaces as straightforward and simple as possible. Some of the things that I've seen folks try to condense as much features and functionality as possible into a single screen so that all the options are available. And in these scenarios, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. I think if we were to take a step back from that, make that interface less confusing, right? Put fewer buttons on the form. Think about the way that our users should be using the form and build the interface to suit that direction. Don't cop out by building an interface that lets you go in any direction, because that's just really confusing for folks. And I think especially so when you look at folks that have, some certain cognitive disabilities. Because the thing with cognitive disabilities is the brain is so complicated, right? There's so many different potential ways that it could be a challenge for them to interact with. So what we want to do is we want to look to that WCAG standard. That WCAG standard will give us the guidelines that we need to make sure we're accommodating folks that have those disabilities and abilities as well. It's a whole topic. I mean, that's something that that's a whole field of study right there in terms of making applications and interfaces accessible for individuals with cognitive yeah, performance. Thanks for the question.
Sorry, it was me who posted. So,
Mhm.
being a parent of a cognitive disabled kid, so I was curious to know that. So,
Yeah,
thanks for the
that's
explanation.
fantastic. One of the things that I've found is that there are a lot of really cool pieces of software out there, just like that Adobe Color that we were looking at. I'll do some research on my end, Prabhati, and see if I can find a similar style tool for that use case, and maybe it can help out your
Yeah.
child in the future. And also, I mean, just right there is just a great example, and thanks for bringing that forward and being willing to share. And it's just like something that brings a smile to your face, right? When you can take something that normally leaves people out and you can include them in that, and you can all automate together.
Yeah, it definitely brought a smile when you started this session, actually.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and if anyone wants to chat with me about this on LinkedIn, one-on-one, just want to set up a call and talk about it, I'm happy to. But I'll see if I can get you added on LinkedIn, provide and follow up with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. I think that's it for questions, Diana. Did you have anything else you wanted me to add?
No, this is just a great session. Thank you so much for presenting today, and I'll make sure that the recording is available tomorrow. I put that information in the chat for you guys. So David's going to have another session next month, and we're looking forward to that. Thank you, David.
Boris, thank you so much. Take
Thanks,
care.
David. That was great.
Bye.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.